Um, Welcome to the second webinar of the 2025 CSE Development in Action webinar series. My name is Evangeline. I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer with the CSE alumni team, and I am excited to welcome you all for this webinar. Today's webinar will be on improving teaching practices in crisis settings, and it's a very exciting topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our webinar speaker, who I will introduce very shortly. Today's webinar, the speaker will discuss about their work in crisis settings. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to send them via the chat box. Today, I'm honored to welcome Commonwealth Alumnus Siddharth Pillai, Vijay Siddharth Pillai. Um, Vijay is, or should I call you Siddharth? Siddharth is an education advisor at Street Child. And as part of his role, he oversaw the education portfolio of the Afghanistan office before and after the political takeover of the Taliban in the country. Of course, in this webinar, he will discuss about his work with education stakeholders within Afghanistan, but also other countries such as Sierra Leone. Um, I'm also happy to inform you that Siddharth is the winner of the 2024 UK Study UK Alumni Award winner for social action. And before we move forward, Siddharth will, of course, share a brief introduction about himself. But I would like to welcome Siddharth to um, deliver this webinar today and engage with us today about his work in crisis settings and promoting education to children within emergency settings. Siddharth, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Eva. Am I audible to you?
Yes, yes, you are. Siddharth, I completely forgot to mention that I forgot to mention about your scholarship details. So just before you begin, I'll just add that. Hi, everyone. Just to let you know that Siddharth is a 2018 Commonwealth Scholar from India, and he completed his MPhil in Education, Globalization, and International Development at the University of Cambridge. That's about it from my end. But Siddharth, please do add to details about your role and your work profile.
Yeah. Am I audible to you right now, Eva?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Eva. Hi, everyone. Um, uh, as I think Eva has already mentioned the work which I'm doing. So yeah, hi. My name is Siddharth. You can call me Sid as well. I currently work as an education program advisor for Street Child for its Afghanistan office. And as Eva was mentioning, just a second. Yeah, sorry. Uh, yeah. Yeah, so basically, as Eva was mentioning, I currently serve as education program advisor for Street Child for its Afghanistan office. I completed my MPhil in Education and International Development from the University of Cambridge as a Commonwealth Shared Scholar. And as Eva was mentioning, I have done short assignments in West Africa, specifically Sierra Leone. I also recently served as a steering group member of the USAID Global Reading Network, and I've also recently served as a senior education consultant for Teach for Palestine. Yeah, so that's basically my role, and I think in this webinar we would be focusing on improving teaching practices in crisis settings, and this would basically when we are talking about that, we'll also talk about how the program design and implementation can help in data-driven decision making. It will also touch upon offline first approach in using technology as a medium to improve education service delivery. And we'll also broadly talk about changing classroom instructional practices at scale. Before we move ahead, it's also important for us to know the context. So the work which I'll be discussing about would mostly focus on Afghanistan. And when we are talking about that work, we'll be talking about the work which we have done just before, during, and after Afghanistan was like violently taken over by Taliban. We'll be also touching upon some of the interventions which may be of relevance to you, which we have been able to use it in deploy in Sierra Leone. Also, to give you a context, like my engagement with Afghanistan was mostly till March 2024. And subsequently, I've been working in Sierra Leone. So the very recent developments in Afghanistan, I'm not fully aware of because of my work in Sierra Leone. So that's something which has to be taken into consideration if you have any specific questions on the recent developments in Afghanistan, specifically in the education space. Um, So yeah, before we go ahead, I just wanted to give you a broad overview of what the webinar would be talking about. So we'll be briefly talking about the learning crisis at the global level, and subsequently we'll also talk about something which is very related, which is the teaching crisis in at the global level as well as in Afghanistan. And then third is something which is which would be, I think, the core of the webinar, where we'll be talking about some of the approaches which we found to be useful in improving instructional practices at scale in Afghanistan and Sierra Leone. And we'll also briefly touch upon the impact which we were able to independently verify. So some of the points which we would be talking about would not just be referring to education per se. It would also be relevant to folks who are working in other thematic areas, be it health or nutrition. We'll be specifically talking about some of the tools which we found to be useful in improving service delivery in crisis settings. Yeah, coming to the learning crisis at the global level, many of you would be already aware of this. So in the past few decades, globally, we have made significant strides in improving access to learning, in the sense that there has been tremendous improvement in enrollment as well as attendance. But globally, we have also seen that, specifically in low and middle income countries, that a sizable number of children are entering and leaving the schooling system without learning much. Of relevance to you is a graph which you see on the right side. So here you can see that there are two line graphs. One is the dark blue graph, which refers to the learning levels of children in the countries which are better performing, and the light blue line graph refers to learning outcomes in countries which are low income and middle income countries. So I would like you to focus on the bottom blue graph. You can see that at grade 4 you have 3% children who have foundational numeracy skills. So foundational numeracy skills is basically the ability of children to identify numbers and do basic mathematical operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And that figure only jumps to 16% when they reach grade 8. So you can see that when a child is transitioning from grade 4 to grade 5, 6, 7, and 8, when they are exiting the primary school, only 16% of children are having the foundational numeracy skills. So this graph is directly coming from the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring report. So this basically goes on to show that large number of children in low and middle income countries, they enter and leave the school, the primary school, without learning much. And compared to that, if you look at the blue line graph, you would see that almost 75% of children have foundational numeracy skills at grade 4, and that rises to 91% when they are exiting the primary school. So you can see that there's a marked difference there, and this difference is, I think, well brought out by a statistic which you can see on the left side, which is basically that in high income countries, 9 out of 10 children are able to read by age 10. And in stark contrast to it, in low income countries, 9 out of 10 children do not cannot read by age 10. So that shows the stark disparity or learning poverty in low income countries vis-a-vis high income countries. So this kind of sets the context for what we are going to discuss in subsequent slides as well. There have been like a huge amount of research has been done as to what are the causal factors for the learning crisis, and as with many other phenomena, there are various reasons for the learning crisis. But one of the what you call one of the strongest reasons for the learning crisis in low and middle income countries has been attributed to the teaching process, rather than the student characteristics or the classroom engagement and some of the other factors. So it is kind of agreed by the community in the education space that one of the areas where we need to significantly work on is improve the quality of the teaching process. And when we are talking about the teaching process, we are talking about two things, which is basically the classroom instruction as well as the engagement between the teacher and the student in the classroom with respect to academic task. So teaching effectiveness or teacher effectiveness is something which needs to be worked upon. And what has been found is that if there's an improvement in teaching effectiveness, one can expect sizable improvement in learning outcomes as well. So that is how I think the learning crisis is strongly associated um, with the teaching crisis. So the teachers are still need a lot of our support in engineering like effective learning environments. So teaching is basically like often defined as engineering of effective learning environments, and that's something which we are still struggling with, especially in low and middle income countries, where a large number of teachers haven't got the required kind of pre-service and in-service training, which could help them engineer effective learning environments. Coming to teaching crisis in Afghanistan, so there have been a lot of studies which have been done on the quality of teaching which is going on in Afghanistan, and the research has shown that teachers in Afghanistan have relatively low absence rate and have high time on task, which is a great what you call which is a positive attribute in the sense that you don't find a huge amount of teacher absenteeism or teachers doing non-academic tasks in the school. So that is not a major issue, but because of the fact that their content knowledge and their ability to package the content knowledge as per the requirement of the child, which is called the pedagogical command over the subject, that is found to be quite poor. So even though the bulk of that classroom time is attributed to academic tasks, the quality of the academic task has been found to be poor by World Bank and a couple of other organizations. And on top of that, this is something which you find in many contexts, but on top of that, you have a crisis in Afghanistan, which again further worsens matters and erodes the capacity of the state to do any kind of a system transformation there. And along with that, as you all may be aware of, there are like huge restrictions on imposed by the de facto authority or Taliban, and because of which one of the facets of that is like there's blanket restriction on the employment of female teachers in Afghanistan, and that has an impact both on male learners and female learners who are undergoing primary education. So just for the sake of folks who don't have a full understanding of the context, so girls education is allowed for the time being up to grade 6, and after grade 6 okay, only it is kind of officially banned by the Taliban. So you still have a good opportunity to improve learning outcomes in the primary education space, but there's ban on female teacher recruitment right now, and as a general ban on female humanitarian workers across many thematic areas. So that has, again, research has shown how the lack of female teachers has an effect on well-being of the children, both for male and female learners. I will not go into details of it for the lack of time. Another observation from World Bank is that there is an attitudinal barrier. So one of the questions which was asked by the World Bank's team to the teachers and head teachers is that what do they identify as the main responsibility in the school? And most of the teachers identified a responsibility other than improving learning outcomes. So for example, that 86% of the teachers felt that the main responsibility was to be at school on time. So yeah, you do see that kind of an attitudinal barrier as well. And if you come to head teachers and support staff who could improve teaching processes, again, the observation was that lot of head teachers and support staff do conduct classroom observations for the teachers, but they do not know as to what to look for in a classroom observation. So these are some of the process related challenges which you do see in Afghanistan, which kind of broadly reflects on the teaching crisis in uh, Afghanistan. So before we go ahead into the approaches, like if you look at the time when we were running our programs in Afghanistan, like just before the Taliban takeover, during the Taliban takeover, and after the Taliban takeover, we were running around 1,600 or 1,800 classes in north, south, and kind of west of Afghanistan. Something called as community-based education centers we were running. So these centers were being run in hard-to-reach villages where there are no schools. So we go ahead and we establish community-based education centers. We identify the most educated person from the village. We train them. We provide children and teachers with the teaching and learning material, and we start the class. And depending on the funding availability, we run an education and emergency class for 1 year, or it could run for 3 years if there is multi-year funding. So yeah, I thought of giving you the context is that you are basically working with the best teachers that are available in that school, so in that area. So that in that region you might have a grade 7 pass out, or you might have a grade 10 pass out. So you will not have a teacher who has gone through like the entire school education and then has got a postgraduate certificate in education. He or she may not have any of that. So they would have just completed middle school or perhaps high school. So you're working with no teachers who are novice, who have and when they enter your program, that is their first day when they are entering classes, right? So that's the context under which we are we were operating, and that further worsens the scenario. Like what you see on screen is basically a reflection of school teachers in Afghanistan who might have spent like 5 or 6 years of their time in schools and might have got some teacher like professional development opportunities. But in the crisis areas where we were operating, things were even more difficult to work with, because we were working with teachers who had no prior experience of teaching, and some of them themselves didn't have even subject command over the subject which they're supposed to teach. So in this context, we were trying to improve classroom instruction at scale. So we were basically we had the opportunity to serve around 60,000 children during while the war was ongoing, and after the war as well. So at that time, we were trying to improve instruction practices for around 1,800 teachers across Afghanistan. And the approach which we had taken is something which you can see on screen. First is basically setting and communicating our expectations. So in terms of expectations, when you are saying, we are talking about our expectations as to what needs to happen in the classroom. And second is to the expectations as to what the children should be able to achieve by the end of grade 1 or grade 2. So there are two kinds of expectations here. One is the teaching process expectations, and second is the learning outcomes expectations. So we had set this expectations, and we had to communicate these expectations. Subsequently, the second stage was to monitor whether the teachers are able to meet those expectations through digital data collection techniques and some of the reports which we will talk about. So that would help us monitor whether those expectations are being met. And third is basically tailoring our support to those who are struggling to meet those expectations through various mechanisms, including coaching. So here, when we talk about coaching, we are talking about folks who are going from one school to other. They are not like subject experts who are stationed at school. They would be project staff who would be assigned 10 or 15 schools. So they will be going on a motorbike from one school to other, observing the teacher, recording their observations on a tablet. And once the data analysis reports gets to the coaches, they will know which teachers need to be further supported. So they are kind of having a roving responsibility, or they are basically mobile coaches, and not a typical coach whom you would see who's an expert subject teacher who is stationed at a particular school. So that's the kind of coaching which we are talking about in emergency setting. So this is the approach, basically setting and communicating expectations. Second, monitoring to meet those expectations. Third, tailoring our support to those who are struggling to meet those expectations. Again, this is an approach which some of the other international agencies have also taken. What we were able to do is to operationalize this approach in a crisis and conflict context, while some of the other international agencies have focused to do this in a developing country context where you don't have high intensity conflict. Yeah, so now the subsequent slides would basically try to discuss a little bit about these three stages. Like how did we set up expectations, then how did we monitor expectations, and how did we tailor tailor our support to meet those expectations. Again, this might be coming from an education context, but folks from other thematic areas might be able to abstract out that information and might find it useful for their thematic area or context as well. So yeah, first I think, as I mentioned, like defining and communicating expectations. So here what you see on screen is the expectations which we had set. So on the top right side, you see expectations which were set for learning outcomes, and the bottom left side and that color table which you see are basically expectations which we had set for teaching process. So bottom left is like process expectations, and top right is the outcome expectations. So these expectations have been set nationally. Some of the expectations have been set nationally, like the governments have set learning outcome benchmarks, and some of the expectations have been set internally by our own organization. So what you see on the top right side is the expectations which are set for reading fluency. So here, government of Afghanistan with some of the donors, they set an expectation that a grade 1 child should be able to read like these many words per minute, right? So for example, a grade 1 child who is able to read 41 Dari words per minute is considered to be a good or proficient reader. Similarly, a grade 2 child who is reading between 1 to 29 Pashto words per minute is considered to be a weak Pashto reader, right? So this is not to categorize children as to weak, strong and all, but to understand where we need to redeploy our resources so that we focus on providing support to the students who are struggling to meet those expectations. So this is, again, this varies from country to country, but every country may be even better placed to set such nationally set benchmarks so that everyone has a clear compass to focus on when it comes to improving, like for example here in this case, oral reading fluency. So you would clearly know how to categorize the children, and everyone, there would be no ambiguity as to whether we are doing well or not. So this is basically outcome expectation. And process expectation, you can see on the bottom left side, we had a clear classroom observation rubric for foundational reading. So we had like 6 parameters, as you can see. I'm not going into details of it. For every parameter, we were measuring the performance of the teacher from 0 to 3. And these parameters are very kind of observable. They are not vague, because many of our coaches themselves were not like expert subject teachers, given the context we were operating. So we had to give them something very, very, very visible and what you call concrete, so that it looks nearly black and white for them, whether it is a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And then based on all these 6 parameters, a teacher's cumulative score is obtained. So if a teacher is scoring a cumulative score of between 0 to 6, that teacher is identified as a weak teacher, 7 to 12 average teacher, and 13 to 18 as a proficient teacher. Again, this categorization is not to rank them and let them know that you are a weak or an average or a proficient teacher, but internally to know which are the teachers where our coaches need to spend more time, and which are the proficient teacher where we don't have to invest a lot of time. And that's very critical, because the context where we are operating, the resources are very less, and the number of coaches are also less. So we'll have to be wise in allocating our time, effort, and money to maximize learning outcomes. So this is defining expectations. And yeah, and after defining expectations, it's important to communicate those expectations to the teachers. So here you can see the first one is a structured teacher guide. Many of you may know that structured teacher guide is considered to be one of the cost-effective interventions in low and middle income countries. So teacher guides provide a lesson-wise structured plan on how to go ahead and teach a particular concept or a particular basically a concept. So it basically provides scaffolding to the teacher to go ahead and deliver a lesson. So that's about the structured teacher guide, and you will see that. And the good thing about the structured teacher guide is that it clearly communicates what is the teaching process expectation from the teacher. So what you see on your screen is a teacher from Zabul. Zabul is considered to be one of the very conservative southern provinces of Afghanistan, and a teacher is trying to look at the structured teacher guide before entering a classroom. So when they are teaching the particular when they have starting their lesson, they will be keeping the structured teacher guide open, and they will go through the entire lesson as per the structured teacher guide. And the coach who is observing this particular teacher would be checking how much of a fidelity the teacher is showing towards the teacher guide, like how closely is the teacher following the teacher guide. These are not what you call scripted lesson plans, but they are structured teacher guides, in the sense that the guide provides a broad structure to teachers to how to go about teaching the lesson. It doesn't give every dialogue which the teacher needs to say verbatim. So that is something different. And the overall theory of change is that as the teacher gains more and more competence in going ahead and teaching the lesson through the teacher guide, subsequently they can keep the teacher guide away, and they can creatively deviate from the guide and provide even better instructional services. So that's the approach. So teacher guide basically clearly on a day-to-day basis clearly communicates to the teacher how they need to go about doing their classroom instruction. Second is the training on structured pedagogy. So again, this is another and much important modality to communicate expectations, because just by providing the teacher guide, it would not be sufficient. So you go ahead and provide a 7-day training to the teachers on how to use the structured teacher guide, give them a lot of opportunity to practice among themselves and gain confidence in the approach. So that's about communicating expectations. So that was communicating teaching process expectations. Now what you see on the left side is communicating learning outcome expectations. So here you can see a coach is trying to check the oral reading fluency of a kid, and once that is done, based on this particular top right table, the coach would be able to identify that particular child as a weak, average, or a proficient child. So a few children would be randomly selected from each class to ascertain whether the class is doing well or is struggling, and then take actions accordingly. So that's communicating expectations from a learning outcome perspective. And on the right side, what you see is a classroom, is a coach. You can see behind the class, a coach has opened his tablet, and you can also see a structured teacher guide next to him. So he's observing the teacher teaching, and is recording whether the teacher is following the structured teacher guide or not. And based on the observation, then further support is provided, which you will see in the next slide. So yeah, after defining and communicating expectations, again, this is how you would see on the tablet. So here, what we have done, again, this is of relevance to all folks who are working in many thematic areas. This is an offline kind of a technology which we use, where we are using something called as Kobo. So the Kobo is programmed in such a way that based on the inputs provided by the coach, the Kobo will automatically provide a feedback on the screen. This is purposefully added because many of our coaches themselves are not expert subject teachers. So we had to program our tablet in such a way that like if a particular coach inputs that this teacher failed to do this particular activity as prescribed, then you would see an automatic pop-up, as you can see what is marked as star, that this will automatically pop up as a like for example what you see on screen is a comprehension improvement tip. So in the previous slide, what the coach had done was that he had inputted that this teacher failed to do the comprehension task properly. So the tablet will automatically pop up this detailed feedback, which the coach can read out to the teacher. So in case you are working with like field workers or grassroots folks who themselves are not very competent, and you want to give a very structured kind of information to the a person who is standing next to you, so this kind of a mechanism does help, and it did help. It helped us ensure that feedback provided to the teachers are very structured. So there's no space for coaches to decide whatever they want to tell, they can tell. So that is something which we would prefer when the coaches are themselves quite professional, and they are well having good command over the subject. But since our coaches themselves are in an area where they are still developing the competency, we wanted the feedback to be way more structured. So that's how we communicate the expectation. So this feedback is directly read to the teacher, so that they get a clear sense of how they were observed and what are the areas where they can further improve. So again, feedback, when you're giving, you will have positive feedback, negative feedback as well. There are different ways to package these feedback, which I think we will not cover in this webinar for the interest of time. So yeah, first, as we discussed, like first we had defining expectations, then we communicated those expectations through the material and through training, and then we kind of communicated those expectations, and then now once we are done with that, we have to support teachers and management to meet the expectation, right? To support them to help the struggling teachers, right? So again, here what you see on screen is a dashboard. So all the data which is collected by the coaches, it comes to the monitoring and evaluation team, which sits at Kabul. And what you see on screen is a dashboard which is publicly made available to all the coaches. It is an interactive Power BI dashboard which is hosted on a particular site, and all the coaches have access to it. And they themselves can like if you are a cluster coordinator, you can go to a particular cluster and see how your children are performing, what percentage of your children are struggling, what percentage of your children are average. Similarly, if you are responsible for a school, like if you are a coach, you are responsible for a school, you might go click on that particular school and see how the teachers of that particular school are performing. So this basically helps in taking data driven decisions at every level. So previous to this, we were kind of taking these decisions sitting at Kabul. But now, because we have ensured that these dashboards are available at every level, they have been trained on how to read and act upon these dashboards. We are expecting like adaptive programming at every level, because at every level they have access to data, and they have been trained on how to read and act upon that data. Yeah. Subsequently, as part of like supporting teachers and management to meet expectations, so based on that data, whatever you are seeing here, like for example, here a particular coach saw that a particular school is struggling, and the teachers there are struggling to meet what is written in the structured teacher guide. Then what happens is that that particular coach goes to that particular schools and invests more time there, so that the struggling teachers become average. So our priority has been to ensure that more time is spent in taking teachers who are struggling to average level, rather than spending more time on getting average teachers to proficient level, because of the scarcity of resources we are facing. So you would see a coach has taken over a particular classroom, and the classroom teacher is basically observing the teacher on observing the coach as to how to efficiently run a class using a structured teacher guide. So this is basically kind of observing and modeling and mentoring, right? That this is what you can see on the left side. And on the right side, you can see a teacher and a coach viewing a video. So we had also kind of developed some videos which demonstrated how these teaching practices are effectively operationalized in the classroom. So some of the proficient teachers in Kabul were brought in, and their teaching was kind of videographed, and that is made available for the teacher in Kandahar or Zabul to view. And once they observe it, then there is a kind of a structured conversation between the coach and the teacher as to what did you see in this class, in this video, which you think you may have missed in the previous class. So that kind of helps them to reflect upon it, and that helps them to make micro plans for their next teaching session. So these are the two ways in which, or rather the three ways in which you would support the teachers and management. So teachers are being supported, as you can see here. Management is more supported by these interactive dashboards to zero down on the schools or the teachers who are struggling, and rediverting resources towards that end. Um, Another interesting kind of an intervention which we are able to do in Sierra Leone is that we found that a good chunk of our coaches were kind of fixated on those schools which are easier to reach. You found that some of the hardest to reach schools which are like across the river, or it takes nearly 4 hours for the coach to reach a particular school, those schools are being kind of ignored. That's something which we came to know through our field visits. We also found that some of the teachers, some of the coaches, they go to schools for a few minutes, and then they are back. So the required dosage of coaching is something which was missing. And when the dosage of coaching gets affected, then the adherence to the design principles of coaching also gets affected. So we and in all these areas, it's difficult to manage at scale as to which coach went where in out of all the 62 schools, which coach spent how much time. So that's a problem which we were struggling with, and this a problem was basically affecting the dosage of our coaching. So what we came up with, and again this might be of relevance to all of you folks who are working in different thematic areas, is to geofence the sites. So what you mean by geofencing is that you you know the GPS coordinates of each of the schools, and you create a geofence of around like 500 meters around that school. And you can do that on a tool like Copo or some of the other tools. And whenever a coach enters that particular geofence, he or she needs to sign in, and whenever they are out, they need to sign out. So if you have geofenced a particular school, that application will work only when we are within the geofence. And then you connect this geofencing app to something called as the Google Looker Studio. I think it's kind of similar to Power BI. And the good thing about that is that whatever data which comes on your geofencing app, it gets automatically populated into the and visualized into the Google Looker Studio. So in short, what happens is that this dashboard on a day-to-day basis clearly tells the program management team as to which schools were visited, how long they were visited, whether it was visited late, or whether it was visited for the appropriate duration. You'll also get to know on a day-to-day basis like how many schools remain unvisited in the last 10 days, right? So this is something which we call as the high frequency administrative monitoring. So this basically helps us in tackling coaching absenteeism, and also tackling low dosage of coaching in hard to reach areas, because in many of these areas, like a program manager cannot go on a day-to-day basis to monitor whether things are going well. So this geofencing plus Looker Studio combination does help in high frequency monitoring, and research shows that whenever there is high frequency administrative monitoring, you are in a better position to tackle phenomena like teacher absenteeism, and it also has a positive effect on improved on learning outcomes if it is tied to incentives. Um, so yeah, this I think these were a couple of the interventions which helped us manage or improve classroom instruction at scale. Coming to impact, we were able to independently verify the impact of our schools, of our program in Afghanistan. And what you see on screen is the effect of our interventions in two provinces, Logar and Nimroz. And you would see here that almost 75% of our children in Logar, they demonstrated desirable or acceptable levels of oral reading fluency. And in Nimroz, you would see that about 80% demonstrated desirable or accepted levels of fluency. And we also found that there has not been any major gap in gender gap in learning outcomes. We couldn't run like a proper randomized control trial. It's very difficult to manage control schools to have a proper counterfactual in crisis context. So we had to rely on the nationally set benchmarks and see what percentage have been able to move into the acceptable or desirable levels of fluency. So this was kind of measured and reported by an independent evaluation agency. So yeah, to summarize, what I would like to say is that like in crisis and conflict context, there's often a lot of priority on access to learning. There's a lot of focus on recovery and rebuilding, which is all very, very important. But what I would like to tell through this webinar is there's also an immediate opportunity to improve what you call quality of education, to improve learning outcomes, which basically strongly ties to the Sustainable Development Goal 4.1. And that's while it's a long term and a strategic endeavor. Our experiences also show that there can be near-term goals which are very much achievable in contexts like Afghanistan or Sierra Leone. And the second major point which I would like to highlight here is that many of the evidence-based practices which we talk about a lot, it gives its impact only when there is a high quality implementation of it. And high quality implementation in crisis settings is a challenge, but it's not unachievable. So like data driven decision making at all levels and high frequency administrative monitoring is very much possible in crisis context, and it can basically improve the dosage of the intervention, and it can also increase adherence to the program design based on which you had initially rolled out your program. So that's I think that brings us to the end of this session. Yeah, I think it's time for Q&A. Over to you, Eva. Thank you so much, guys, for your time.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Siddharth, and such a brilliant presentation. It was so enlightening to hear about the contextual and background information that you shared about, your experience of working with teachers and coaches in Afghanistan and Sierra Leone as well, and the efforts that go in promoting quality education in these crisis settings. Of course, we will start the Q&A session now. So I would urge the attendees to start sending any questions you might have in the chat box. In the meantime, thank you so much to all those who sent in their questions prior to the webinar via the registration forms. Siddharth, if you're okay, I would like to start from the bank of questions that we already have. And of course, we will simultaneously, I will look at the questions that we received in the chat box as well.
Sure.
Great. So the first question is around the teaching environment. So in your experience, how would the teachers or coaches, or how would the teachers teach in environments where there are no classrooms available?
Yeah, so I think there's an important model from Afghanistan, which I think can be contextually replicated and adapted in many other countries, and that's called the community-based education model which I was referring to earlier. Unfortunately, I think the Taliban is right now kind of winding up the community-based education model for their own reasons. So basically, what happens in a community-based education system is that you have a lot of villages where you don't have any school in close proximity, and when the proximity to a school reduces, the chances of children enrolling in a particular school also reduces. So community-based education system comes up as a stopgap measure where an NGO or the state itself decides to set up a community-based school. So what happens is that you go to a particular village, identify all the out-of-school children, you identify a particular a room or a set of rooms which can be made available by the villagers on a pro bono basis. You identify the a particular teacher who is, I think, the most educated person in that particular village or a set of villages, and then you conduct your proficiency exams, and then you select the teacher. Then you provide the teaching and learning material which has made available either by the state or through a donor, and then you train the teacher, and then you run the class for like how many years depending on the funding available. So that's a great model for Afghanistan that has worked really well. Research also shows that the learning outcomes in community-based education centers has been found to be better than the learning outcomes in some of the brick and mortar schools which are run by the state. So having a brick and mortar kind of a setup is not a what you call necessary condition for improving learning outcomes. It can aid in the overall well-being of the child, but you can still improve learning outcomes in these settings, as I was mentioning. And there are a lot of advantages there. Like many of these villages are surrounded by remnants of explosives. So the parents would not want children to go to a nearby to a school in the next village because of the risk to the child. And there are gendered perceptions of insecurity, which again prevents girl child to go to a near school in the nearby village, even if it is close by. So community based education does kind of try to respond to it. Obviously there are some sustainability issues, as in like once the funding is over, how will the child transition to a nearby school. Those are challenges which I think the Afghanistan the cluster is still kind of struggling with, I think. But still, in areas where there is no access to a brick and mortar school, and there's no like typical classrooms or schools available, community based education centers are, I think, in a very good position to respond to that situation. Yeah, over to you, Eva.
That was such a brilliant point, and it just got me thinking about the various settings and, of course, challenges that children face, and of course, teachers face as well in these situations. And I would like to see more of these conversations in the post-webinar networking session. So, if you are an alumnus or scholar working in this area where you have implemented or seen education settings where there is no a classroom setting, and how has the teaching and learning process been in these settings, please do continue having those discussions in the post-webinar networking session. um, just looking at the questions in the chat box before I go to the other questions that we received. Um, Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. Could you also explain how the teachers in Afghanistan are able to overcome the issue of low content knowledge of the subject that they teach, as well as the low pedagogical command of these subjects?
Yeah, so that's a challenge. I think there are no hard answers. So there are no like easy answers to that. Like at the lower primary level, it is easier to ensure that the teachers have both the subject command and the pedagogical command through the help of structured teacher guides and extensive kind of teacher training program. So like your pre-service training programs would run for a couple of weeks. Obviously that is not sufficient. That doesn't compensate for long duration pre-service programs which happens in other countries. But we do have some space to upskill the teachers in terms of both subject command and the teaching process. Pedagogical command is something which is kind of taken care by the structured teacher guide, because how to package a particular concept to the child is kind of very in a very operational and a granular sense made available to the teacher guide through the teacher guide. In higher grades, it is still a challenge, because it is easier to develop a structured teacher guide at the lower primary levels for literacy and numeracy, compared to when you're dealing with a relatively abstract and more sophisticated and connected domains or concepts which are taught in the middle school or the high school. So I think there's only a limited area where we can intervene, where without touching on the broader challenges which we are facing in the teacher professional development space. But in the primary education, I think we have kind of figured out how to tackle that to a large extent through the help of structured teacher guides and the in-service coaching and teaching in-service coaching programs, right? So that's something which is I think largely tackled. But again, if you do a structured teaching pedagogy program in India vis-a-vis you do it in Afghanistan, obviously in India, the teachers in India may be in a better position to do that, because they would have had extended pre-service training. They would have gone through multiple rounds of training in the previous academic years, compared to a community-based teacher who has just entered an education and emergency project and has never been in a classroom, right? So, but definitely the impact, as in the differential improvement in learning outcomes, you will see in both the countries. So yeah, from that perspective, I find that in the primary education level, especially in foundational literacy and numeracy, both in crisis context and in the normal developing country context, we have uh, we can make a sizable impact, even though there's a lot more to achieve after that as well. Yeah, over to you,
Mm.
Eva. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Siddharth. Um, the next question is around how do we select teachers? So, you've spoken about there are gender-based restrictions or between your male teachers and female teachers. Um, in that instance, how do we go about selecting the most well-deserved or most educated teacher in the community?
Yeah, so yeah, teacher recruitment has been always kind of political, in the sense that when you are working in Taliban controlled areas, there is you get specific names nominated from the de facto authority. These folks have to be taken into consideration. There have been instances where we had to like go back and forth with them. They specifically nominated one person whom they want to be recruited as a teacher. Some of the folks in the de facto authority may come with the right intention. They know that he's the most educated person, so they may nominate someone. Some of them would come up with the wrong intention, and they would want to push someone who is already a kind of a proxy Taliban guy, right? So there are ways of negotiating that. Some of the ways is that you agree to them, but you also say that you have to nominate X number of people, and then you will conduct a competency test, and whoever is the most competent in that gets elected. Um, yeah, so otherwise, there are areas in Afghanistan, especially before Taliban, where you cannot run an education project without like agreeing to the demand from Taliban that you will recruit a teacher, one of the many nominated teachers, one of the many candidates who have been nominated by Taliban. So all the folks who are being tested for their competency would all be nominated by Taliban. So if they're so that's a precondition to start your work in those areas. So that's understandable, but we try to kind of compensate for that by making it clear that we are not going to recruit one person whom they are nominating. They'll have to nominate 10 folks, and then we'll conduct an exam, and then select the best one. With regards to female teacher recruitment, it's a of late, I think it's completely banned, especially for community-based education. For female teacher recruitment has been kind of completely stopped, and I don't see uh, any indications as to why they would kind of um, what you call make their stand more flexible in the days to come. But yeah, I think you would also find that there is some space for kind of intervening. So sometimes you will find the federal folks or the folks who are sitting at Kabul to be very non-cooperative, but you might find a pro reform de facto authority or Taliban guy who is willing to who is willing to hear you, and if you are making a strong case, they might even accede to your request. So when the Taliban was during the war and immediately after the war, there were areas where they stopped us from recruiting female coaches. We went ahead and had back-to-back negotiations, and subsequently they did agree. So you have in every context, however hard it is, you have a space for change. But also the fact that you are working in an area where the de facto government is ideologically opposed to the girls education, you will have to appreciate the imperfectness of situation and move ahead. Yeah, coming to how the teachers are selected, we have standard questions, like as in many of the other places where we do teacher recruitment. There would be a little bit of questions on child development, questions on their subject command over especially foundational literacy and numeracy, a little bit on pedagogical what you call content knowledge, right? The ability to package and repackage academic concepts. So these are three or four things. We also have questions on child protection, child safeguarding, because of the context where we are operating. So yeah, so on these, there's a written test, and then subsequently there is an interview, and then teachers are selected. But teacher recruitment, as in many other places, is heavily political, and in crisis settings where there's a huge employment crisis, yeah, it becomes even further political, and to the extent that like sometimes the only thing which the de facto authority is interested is about teacher recruitment. They're not bothered about how classes are ongoing. But yeah, again, as I said, there are exceptions where we have found Taliban folks in particular states or provinces who have shown very proactive interest, wanted to know how classes are functioning. Yeah, so you will see a spectrum there as well. Yeah, over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much. It was quite interesting to hear more about teacher recruitment. You've spoken a lot about the structured teachers guide. Our audience are interested in knowing how to get access to the structured teacher guide.
Oh, okay. So structured teacher guide has been identified to be one of the most cost-effective interventions in across the world in education space. So if you go and check the GEEAP report, so there's a global evidence in education advisory panel, which every year comes up with a report which is called as the Smart Bias report. So it identifies structured pedagogy program to be one of the smart bias, which means that it is one of the most cost-effective ways of improving learning outcomes. So if you go to their site, you will find some resources on structured teacher guides. Again, going to a site called as a Science of Teaching would also provide you relevant resources on structured teacher guides. Going to World Bank's education's practice site, you will also get a lot of resources on structured teacher guide. Structured teacher guide varies from country to country, because like in Afghanistan, it will be in the local language, Dari or Pashto. If you go to one of the states in North India, the structured teacher guide would be in Hindi, because the teacher who is going to use it only knows Hindi, right? If you go to structured teacher guide in Sierra Leone, it would be in English, because they're able to read English there, right? So but the sites which I am referring to, and if you just go and check on the internet, you will find a lot of resources which will help you analyze these structured teacher guides even better, like how to understand whether a structured teacher guide is effective, or does it meet the basic design principles. So I think the World Bank site the science of teaching site. Yeah, I think just doing a Google search would you will get a lot of relevant tools on how to analyze, comprehend, or design structured teacher guides. So yeah, I think happy to reach, like if anyone is specifically interested in knowing more, they can reach out to me over email as well, and I can share more links there.
Definitely. And in a while, I will share Sid's email in the chat box. Sid, conscious of time, and I know you have other commitments, but just one quick last question before we end the Q&A session. You've spoken about teachers and coaches using technology and devices. How often are the technological devices, such as mobile phones and tablets, used by teachers and students for teaching and learning purposes?
Yeah, so students, so there are the two kinds of, like when you're talking about the interventions here, we can like try to categorize them into teacher facing edtech interventions and student facing edtech interventions. So student facing edtech intervention in crisis settings, because of the cost associated with it, is often kind of not unfeasible or impractical, but still, like for example, girls' education in Afghanistan, because of the general ban on girls' education. Some of the education technology interventions which are going on is child facing. So where either children are being provided smartphones, or if they already have smartphones, internet is being made available for them for free, and content is being made available for free. So things like that are happening. But when you're talking about improving instruction at scale in crisis settings, the edtech interventions need to be kind of teacher facing or coach facing, because when you are trying to provide those edtech services to the teacher or the coach, it has a multiplier effect, because if you are able to improve the capacity of one teacher, it has an impact on 30 or 35 children. So a smartphone in the hand of a teacher would impact 30 students, and a smartphone in the hand of a coach will directly impact perhaps like 10 teachers multiplied by 30 children, so like around 300 children, right? So that's the kind of logic which we use. I don't know whether we have any research backing on that, but plainly, because we are not in a position to provide student facing edtech intervention. So most of our edtech interventions are either coach facing, like for example, as we discussed, like the coach is provided the tablet which helps them record the classroom observation data, and the tablet automatically kind of pops the feedback up so that they can provide structured feedback to the teacher. Again, the tablet has some model videos of a proficient teacher teaching some like demonstrating some effective teaching practices, and that the teacher is shown that particular video by the coach, right? So if you are targeting around 1800 classes, right, so you need basically 180 tablets. That's we had one coach for 10 teachers, so 1800 teachers means 180 tablets, right? You can't have like 60,000 tablets. No donor is would be interested in providing that kind of funding for crisis settings. And second is that like edtech, the fact that you are able to make interactive dashboards available to the coach, or perhaps the cluster coordinator or the program manager, to see, okay, the cluster coordinator can see how many of my coaches went to the schools yesterday, how much time did they spend in that class, whether did they go at 10 a.m. or they went there for 3 at 3 p.m. and were there till for 15 minutes, right? So basically our edtech interventions are basically to kind of improve the or empower our coaching staff and the project management staff to take effective data driven decisions. It is not so much focused on providing content to the child. Obviously there is a lot of merit in providing content to the child as well, but in the context where we are operating, that is kind of not very feasible.
Perfect. Well, I think with this we come to an end of the Q&A session, and of course we've had lovely feedback coming through in the chat box. I do hope you can spare a few minutes to go through the messages in the chat box. If we can just move to the next slide. If you would like to connect with Siddharth, please feel free to get in touch with Siddharth via his email address. I've also popped his email address in the chat box. But Siddharth is more than happy to answer any queries you might have, or learn more about, or respond to any queries about his work, or just basically network and connect with him. Please feel free to get in touch with Siddharth. And of course, we will soon have our post webinar networking session now, but unfortunately, Siddharth can't wait for the session. So, Siddharth, over to you to summarize anything you would like to, or share anything you'd like to with our attendees today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eva, and thank you all for your time. I know that we have got scholars as well as alumnus in this call. So especially the scholars who are currently in the colleges right across UK. Yeah, the only thing I just wanted to add is that if you're keen to work in crisis context, yeah, just something which my CEO always tells me is to appreciate the imperfectness of the situation, and there's a huge amount of kind of satisfaction which you gain from working in crisis settings. I've worked both in development and crisis context, and I find the work which I do in crisis settings very satisfying. So yeah, happy to get in touch with anyone who is more interested in the topic or wants to make a transition to the from development to crisis context. I'll try to help you as much as I can. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Over to you, Eva.